Okay, happy Valentine's Day, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the buying process for condos and co-ops. And what I tried to do was make it as simple as possible to go through the 7 steps of working with a potential buyer. Again, we'll do a workshop on kind of single and multifamilies. The process is a little different, though fairly similar. But we're going to kind of go through everything from the beginning. And again, feel free to ask questions as we go along, or you can type into the chat box. So here are the 7 steps. And I think, the first step is one of the most important, making sure that you're reviewing with your potential home buyer the whole process and going over it with them. And we'll talk in a minute about the buyer consultation, and then doing the search. The second step is submitting an offer and negotiating with the seller's agent or the seller directly. The third step is the deal sheet and the contract preparation. The fourth is the contract signing. The fifth is the mortgage and funding process. The sixth is the board process. And the seventh is the closing. Sometimes if you're working with a cash buyer or with a sponsor unit, you'll skip maybe step 5 and or 6. And we'll kind of talk about that as we go along. Again, at the top of all of these, I kind of highlighted who's in charge, right? Who's the person that we kind of have to take cues from? When I say broker, I mean you as the agent. At some points, it'll be the attorney or the mortgage banker, if there is one, who will kind of be in charge of the process. But I just want to kind of lay out kind of where you should be taking the lead and where you should be referring to other people. So again, the first thing that you want to do before you're taking someone out is to do the buyer consultation with them. And Weichert has a really great resource for you. Again, it's something where you can sit down with a potential home buyer and go over the process with them of purchasing a home in New York City or New York State. During the buyer consultation, you'll want to review, where they're looking, what they're looking for, the difference between a condo and a co-op. You'll want to make sure that they have signed or that you've sent to them in SkySlope already the 4 required forms for any time we're working with a buyer. Again, the agency disclosure form, the fair housing disclosure form, the RESPA form, and the wire fraud notice. And again, those can all be sent via SkySlope, or you can take it with you, print it out, and have it signed, in person. That's not a problem either. You'll go over with them the revenue financial statement, which we'll talk a little bit more about, and debt to income ratios, which we'll also discuss today. You also want to make sure that they have their full team together, right? Again, do they have a real estate attorney? A great question to ask when they're starting, because people who are buying from other states might not know that they need to have an attorney. If they don't have one, you can introduce one or a number of them that you work with so they can make a decision. If they have their own, this is a great time to get their contact information and call and introduce yourself, right? Because you guys are going to be forming part of a team that's going to be working together in order to get the deal done. The same thing with a mortgage broker, right? If they don't have one, you can introduce Doug, our great mortgage broker here at Weichert. Or if they have their own, you can call and introduce yourself as well, again, because you're going to be working closely together through this whole process. It's important to know all the players on your team, right? Again, this is a great time to verify that they have a pre-approval form. Again, that's part of the discussion about them having a mortgage broker. And to make sure that you kind of take a look at it, right? It should have a price that they can afford up to, the percentage of the down payment, and the terms on the approval letter. If they don't have that, you can ask them to get that. Again, make sure it's for the property type that they're looking at, right? If they're looking at condos, make sure it's a condo pre-approval. If they're looking at co-ops, a co-op pre-approval, right? Sometimes you might have a buyer and you get a single-family home pre-approval form. And again, the form should kind of say what they're looking at, or a multifamily one, when they're actually looking at condos or co-ops, right? So it's a great time to kind of review that with them. Again, if they don't have a pre-approval, introduce them to Weichert, right? And the best way to do this is not to say, hey, here's Doug's information, call him. What you can say to them is, I'm going to have my amazing colleague Doug give you a call. When works best for you? You take down a time, send an email to Doug with their contact information, and I usually even give them Doug's phone number so they can put in their phone, they know who's calling them. So after you've done the buyer consultation and gone through these things with them, what you want to do is you want to go out and show apartments, right? The fun part, going out, seeing places, getting feedback after each showing is a really important thing. One thing that I find that makes it easier for me when I'm working with a buyer is I always keep track on a Google sheet that I share with my client every property. And again, I put the price, the common charges or maintenance and the maintenance or the common charge and taxes, the asking price. I often put what it last sold for, so they have a sense of a potential floor for the sale price for the seller. Again, if it's something that goes into contract quickly, I notate that, right? Because that way it gives them a sense of the market and what's going on. So after, so here are some of the pages of the buyer consultation, right? This can be found in the Google Drive. If you don't have access to the Drive, let me know and I'll give you access to that. Basically, it has all the information that you should go through with them. And again, for me, the most important page is this one here on the left, right? This is when you are describing kind of what we're going through today to any buyer that you're working with, right? What is the process of buying a home in New York? What are the steps, right? The first is a buyer consultation, getting pre-approved for a mortgage, seeing homes, putting in an offer, right? And we'll talk about what that offer looks like in a second. Negotiating, having the contract signed, doing an inspection if they are doing one, board approval if there is that, protecting the home with cinch if they want a home protection plan, confirming the closing, and then what happens after the closing, right? And so again, if you ever have any questions about this, refer back to this presentation or refer to the buyer consultation to refresh your mind, right? After you do it a couple times, it gets very, very simple, and we'll do another workshop on the buyer consultation itself at some point in the near future. But there are a couple of recordings on the YouTube channel of the buyer consultation, me doing the buyer consultation with people, so you can kind of get a sense of the flow of that presentation. Again, during the buyer consultation, you'll want to make sure that you're going over the revenue financial statement. Again, it looks like it's a ton of things, but in reality, really the first page is what needs to be filled out. And this is a very, very basic asset and liability statement, right? It talks about the funds that a potential buyer has, where those funds are, right? Both in liquid funds, like money market funds, cash funds, stocks and bonds and things like that. Non-liquid funds like retirement, life insurance, as well as their base salary, overtime wages, bonuses, kind of investment income, what debts they have, be it another home loan, auto loan, credit card loan or debt, anything like that. And what this allows you to do, and that's why I think it's so important from the beginning, is to look at your applicant and how board approvable they are, right? How board worthy, some people would say. Especially if you're looking at someone who's looking at co-ops. Co-ops usually have certain regulations on what's called the debt to income ratio, right? And again, you might not be great at math. I'm not the best at math. It's not a problem. It's a fairly easy thing to figure out, right? And what it looks at is the ratio of monthly expenses, right? Debt servicing, right? That's why it's called debt to income, versus their monthly income. And why do we need to know this, right? When we're working with someone who's buying a co-op, most co-ops have a maximum debt to income ratio, right? And so they will say that the buyer has to be below X%, right? And I would say kind of across many places, it's about 25%, and some of them are 30 or 33%, right? And so how do you figure this out, right? You take all of their debt payments plus the mortgage and maintenance or mortgage, real estate taxes and common charges, and divide it by what their monthly pay is, right? What their monthly salary is, bonuses, rental income, whatever it is. So for an example, let's say we had someone who was looking to buy a co-op, right? And they're looking at a co-op where their mortgage would be $2,600 a month. The maintenance on that co-op is $1,600 a month. And they have $200 a month in a student loan that they have, right? So if we add up those three payments, their debt every month after purchasing this home is going to be $4,400, right? And if the combined monthly salary, right? And again, we want to compare apples to apples, right? Monthly debt to monthly income is, let's say, $14,000 a month, right? Then their debt to income ratio is going to be 31.4%. And what does that mean? Well, if the listing agent says, oh, the maximum debt to income ratio for this building is 30%, they might not get approved, right? Even if their finances are pretty good. And again, there are potential solutions for this, right? They might be able to pay off their student loans. Again, that would reduce the number a little bit. They might be able to put down more, right? So their mortgage would be less, right? So you can think of the things in here that we could adjust, right? The student loan could be paid off and then go down. The mortgage could be less. The maintenance, that's not going to change, right? That's set by the building. And maybe their salary is going up, or it has gone up, you know, maybe, or they have some other source of income. Who knows, right? They're going to get a side hustle or something like that. But, you know, really having the revenue financial statement from the beginning will help you make sure that you're showing them properties that they can afford, right? This is about saving you time and making you look good, and at the same time, saving them time, right? The worst thing that can happen is that they can fall in love with the property, put in an offer, get it accepted, and then you find out that they have too much debt, right? You know, it's kind of a waste of it's a waste of a lot of people's time, and you've gotten them excited about something that they maybe can't afford. Okay, so we're through, again, the buyer consultation, showing them apartments and things like that. Now we get to the point where they say, okay, you know what? 123 Main Street, that's for me, right? So now what do? We need to submit an offer to the listing agent in writing with whatever they want to present, right? And again, I say whatever they want to present because it is our job to help guide them on the market, to help them see what recent sold properties are, you know, what's been listed in the building, what it's gone for, things like that. But it is not our job to come up with a number that they should present, right? You can present a range, but really it is their job to come up with whatever number. One of the worst things you can say is, oh, I think, you know, 525 will be accepted, right? Or, oh, I think, you know, I think you could get it for this, right? Because that kind of opens you up to liability if they could have gotten it for a lower number, or if they don't get it for that, right? They're like, well, you told me to put in this offer. That's not our job. Our job is to guide them, show them property, show them the market, help them, right? You know, the price per square foot in this building has been between 1,000 and 1,100 for everything that's sold. This is asking 1,200, but it's better renovated, right? So maybe it's a good asking price, right? And again, things like that are okay. But when they do come up with their number and they send it over to you, right? I always say, send me an email with the number you want and any terms that you have in there, right? And they send a quick email. It doesn't have to be a full sentence even, right? Please offer 999 on this property. Boom, that's it. Well, that's a full sentence, but anyways, you get my drift. So what should be in the offer, right? So again, and we'll see an example of an offer in a second, but the terms of the deal, right? The price, the financing, and if it's financing contingent, what percentage they're putting down, any inclusions, right? If there's some really nice fixtures they want to keep and you want to make sure they're keeping it, you need to put that in the offer. What the closing date is, right? So if they want to close ASAP, they want to close in 3 months, whatever it is, right? If they want to close at the seller's discretion, whatever works best for them, great. If it's a sponsor unit, which we'll talk about in a little bit, or a new development, you need to be specific in your initial offer on what closing costs are to be covered by the seller, if that's part of the negotiation, right? And again, there's some YouTube videos on working with new developments and sponsor sales, but again, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. But let's make sure that we're considering that in when we put in the offer. Name and address of your buyer, potentially a short bio. You know, Jim is a financial analyst at Goldman Sachs. He's lived in the neighborhood for 5 years and looks forward to staying there, whatever that is, right? I always include the real estate attorney that they're using because that makes you look more prepared and they know that you're ready to go to the next step. And again, some brokers will require that an offer sheet is completed by them. That's fine. They will provide that to you. Just ask them for what they would like provided. We have a generic one again in the in SkySlope and in the Google Drive, so you can always use that as well. And there are certain details that need to be sent along with an offer, right? If they are financing, you must include the pre-approval letter with the offer. If they are not financing, right, if they're paying cash, you need to provide proof of funds. And proof of funds is a recent bank statement or bank statements that show the purchase or the offer price plus closing costs in liquid funds, right? Be it a brokerage account, a cash bank account, whatever it is, right? If they're if they're getting financing, or if they're buying in a co-op, always, you also need to include the revenue financial statement. And many times recently, condo purchases have also asked for the revenue financial statement. So that's why we always want to have it done when we meet with them in advance, so that they're ready to put an offer when they are. So again, you put in the offer. We'll see what an offer letter looks like in the next slide. I always call the broker and say, hey, just want to let you know I presented an offer, right? You wait to hear back from them. Usually it's within 24 hours. Sometimes it's very quick. Sometimes they can take a little bit longer. But then you go back and forth, right? Let's say it's a 1.1 offer price. You put an offer at 999. They come back at 1050. You guys settle at 1025 or something like that, right? You negotiate back and forth and stuff like that. Again, if you are presenting an offer with a member who is not a REBNY member, if you're a REBNY member, or is not a LIBOR member, if you're a LIBOR member, you need to confirm in writing with the seller's agent what the commission is being paid for you bringing the buyer, right? Before you put the offer in, right? So ask them, right? If you find it on Zillow and they're not listed anywhere else, say, hey, just wanted to confirm, what percentage are you paying to Weichert for bringing the buyer, right? This will be very important down the road because you don't want to not get paid for your time and energy, right? So make sure that you're doing that, right? If it's on OLR, it will always say there. If it's on LIBOR, it will always say there. If it is not on either of those places, right? Many people will still co-broke with us, but we want to confirm what they're paying us. Okay, so here's a sample offer letter, right? And this was basically taken from one that I actually put in there already, right? So I am, hello, Jonah, right? The other broker. I'm authorized on behalf of my clients, John Jacobs and Pietro Carlos, to offer 1.7 million for apartment 5 at 44 Sullivan Street. They will be putting down 20% and obtaining financing for Chase Bank for the remaining 80% of the purchase. They're able to close extremely quickly and have an attorney selected. Again, I didn't put in the name. I should have put the name in. And they have Randy Chang selected as their attorney. He is a New York City-based real estate attorney, right? Great things to say. Their pre-approval and REBNY form is attached. And again, in this case, if we are working with a sponsor sale or a new development, and in this case, it was a sponsor sale, we're also asking the sponsor to pay all sponsor, building, NYC, and NYS closing costs, right? So again, when you're purchasing from a sponsor or a developer, whatever you want to call them, usually the New York City and New York State transfer taxes and mortgage taxes are paid by the buyer, not the seller, right? Traditionally, the transfer tax is usually paid by the seller. In this case, we want the buyer. I apologize. It's usually paid by the seller. In the case of a sponsor sale or a new development, they push that off onto the buyer, right? It's the first time it's being sold in the open market. In this case, we wanted them to pay it. They did. We also had them pay the mansion tax. They paid the capital contribution. They gave us a storage unit, right? These are all things that can be negotiated. Again, I don't want to go into the details of that right now, but you can look at those videos to kind of see what you can negotiate. Again, I put a little bit about them. John and Pietro are longtime NYC residents and would make an amazing addition to the community at 44 Sullivan Street. They're currently living in a rental at 25 Central Park West and are excited to make the move back to Soho. Thanks so much. Look forward to putting this deal together. All the best, Jason, right? Followed up with a call. We negotiated. I think we settled at 1.75 for this. It wasn't 744 Sullivan, but it was another property. So again, that is an offer, right? The thing to remember about offers in New York State are that offers are not binding, right? They are not things that bind the buyer to purchasing the property. You put in the offer, it's put in good faith, you negotiate in good faith, but there is a due diligence period after, which we'll talk about during the deal sheet and contract prep, right? Where the attorney is going to do the due diligence, right? So again, let's say we came to accepted terms on this. A deal sheet, it's called a bunch of things. Deal sheet, term sheet, offer acceptance sheet, binder, whatever they want to call it, right? Is going to be sent out. You as the buyer's agent are going to send your side of the deal sheet in the body of an email to the seller's agent. Excuse me. And what is that information? Your buyer's name and address, right? Their attorney's name, address, and contact information, and your name, brokerage firm information, license number, and contact information, right? All of that is your side of the deal sheet when you're representing a buyer. The seller's agent will then put together a completed form, right? And we'll see it in a second, with the buyer side on one side, the sales side on the other, and they will then forward it on to both attorneys. Based on that going out, the attorneys will get in touch with one another. The attorney for the buyer will do the due diligence, which we'll talk about in a second, negotiate the contract on behalf of the buyer, and then they will come to terms on some sort of contract. So what is due diligence, right? What is that? That is the review of all pertinent information on the condo or co-op by the buyer's attorney. And there are a number of things that go into that, right? There is usually a questionnaire, which is a list of questions that the buyer's attorney is sending to the management company to find out things, right? It's a way of getting information, and usually there's a fee associated with that is paid by the buyer, right? $250 to $500, I would say. They can ask questions like, when was the roof redone in the building? When was the boiler done? When was the elevator redone? Are there any upcoming assessments? Is anyone in arrears? What is the monthly maintenance? It's confirming a lot of information, right? So that your buyer is knowledgeable about the state of the building and that unit when they're signing the contract, right? It's almost like doing an inspection on the entire building, through the management company. There's the offering plan, which is the documents of formation of the building, which is provided by the seller. Building financials, budget, amended financials for the last 2 to 3 years, house rules, the co-op board sale packet, right? All of that is in here too. And again, here's an example of a deal sheet, right? Again, a fake address and stuff like that. But this is again, and when you're working with a buyer, you're sending this, right? So you're sending the buyer's information, their attorney, and the buyer broker, right? And then that goes to the seller's agent. They complete it with all this stuff. In this case, I was representing the seller. And again, it has the managing agent, purchase price, shares, yada, yada, all that stuff. Okay, so the next step is going to be the contract signing, right? And the attorney is the one who kind of handles, again, that back and forth on the contract and then the actual signing. So once the contract is finalized, the buyer will sign the contract and put down the contract deposit, right? So it's important to remember that there are 2 terms we're going to be using here. Contract deposit, like it says, is the amount of money that is put down when they sign the contract. That is held in escrow by the seller's attorney until the closing. Usually, typically it's 10%. Sometimes if they're putting down less, like if they're putting down 3.5% or 5%, maybe it's that number. But it's an amount that basically holds the property and is held by the seller's attorney until the closing. This number is different than the down payment, right? Again, for most co-ops in New York City, the buyer has to put down 20%, right? So if they put down 10% at the contract deposit, then the other 10% towards the down payment is coming when they sit down at the closing table, right? Again, if they're putting down 10% on a condo, maybe that contract deposit then gets rolled over into the 10% down payment, right? So again, there's a difference between contract deposit and down payment. That's one of the big things that kind of confuses people, right? So someone could be putting 20% down, but the contract deposit is 10%. So the buyer signs, they wire the funds to an attorney, they sign the contract, the seller signs the contract. Once the seller's attorney sends the fully executed contract back and confirms the wire was received, it is that point that you have a fully executed contract, right? And that is when the property is off market, right? Or is in contract finally. Up until this point, anything can happen to the deal. The buyer can walk away. The seller can accept another offer, right? Anything can happen up until that point. And so one of the things that you need to attempt to do, and part of our job, is to help facilitate the shortest period possible between an accepted offer and the contract signing, right? And we do that by helping the attorney get all this due diligence material, quickly sending out our side of the deal sheet, and helping facilitate, right? Checking in with the attorney every day or every other day, right? Checking with the other side. Hey, how are things going? Have you heard anything, right? We're kind of, again, we're facilitating in this phase, even though we're not the ones kind of quarterbacking it, right? The attorney's the one doing it. So again, we're in contract now. Congratulations. So what's the next step, right? And so the next step is the mortgage and funding stage, right? So as soon as the contract is fully executed, your buyer, or you, if they give you permission, will send a copy of the contract over to whatever bank they're working with, right? To the banker that they're assigned. And again, that's why having a relationship with them when you do the buyer consultation is good, because then you can tell them where everything is. The mortgage officer will then order an appraisal, right? And the appraisal is what's done by the bank to make sure that their funds are secure and that they're making a good investment by giving, Jane 80% of the purchase price. So the appraiser comes in and evaluates the purchase price, right? Again, the seller's agent will usually provide comps to show that it was well priced and that it should be worth that amount. Again, you as the buyer's agent can do the same thing, right? If you know X, Y, and Z have sold recently for at or above that price, great, give it to the appraiser. Again, the seller's agent will usually be the one meeting the appraiser, but you can also potentially ask to go if you'd like to. Usually that happens within about a week of when it's ordered. If it appraises, we keep going. If it doesn't appraise, either you need another appraisal, right? Maybe there's something wrong with it. And if that happens, let me know. We can look at it and see what happens, right? I sold the property over on Charlton Street, right? Where the bank appraised it for almost $1 million less than it was worth. They used, it was a condo, so basically a condo. They were only using co-op sales from like the Lower East Side for something in Hudson Square, so they were incorrect. We gave the bank all the correct information and we went from there. So again, or they can try a different bank, right? Or that you can change the price, right? There are things that can happen, but again, if an appraisal comes in under, let me know, we'll troubleshoot it together. That's part of the reason I'm here. So again, if it appraises, the loan processing continues. Usually about 3 to 4 weeks after the appraisal comes back, you get a commitment letter from the bank, right? And forms which are called Aztec agreements, if it's a co-op. Those are also called recognition agreements. It's basically an agreement between the bank, the board, and the buyer saying that if the buyer defaults on the loan, that the bank can sell it with board approval. That's basically what the Aztec agreement says. So it's at this point when you have the commitment letter that you can submit the condo or co-op package, right? And again, let's say it's a cash deal, boom, you skip step 5. Okay, so now we're in at the board process, right? They have their appraisal done, they have their commitment letter, right? So now we can submit the board package. So a board package is usually required by both condos and co-ops, right? And we'll talk about what rights the condos and co-ops have on the next step. The package is prepared by the buyer's agent in coordination with the buyer. Oftentimes you will be working with or you must have it reviewed by the selling broker before submitting it to the board. And it's a lot of financial information, reference letters, things like that, right? Again, we've got YouTube videos on how to do a board package to simplify everything. Once the package is completed and submitted, there's usually some fees associated with it. It's given to the management company who reviews it, runs any credit checks or background checks, and then they forward it on to the board. The board, usually about 2 weeks after the package is submitted to management, will usually either ask for more information or for an interview, right? And again, once you get to the phase of a board interview, it's usually a very reasonable sign that they will be approved. The board interview is scheduled by the management company. It's still often virtual these days over Zoom. And the time for the board, and this is really a time for the board to get a sense of the applicant off paper, right? Their personality, their interests, if they're crazy, whatever it is, right? Again, after the board interview, usually within about a week, sometimes it's the next day, sometimes it's 3 days later, you will get either a board approval or a board rejection. So again, what does co-op and condo approval mean, right? So with a condo board, right, the only thing that the board has is called the right of first refusal. They either exert or waive their right of first refusal for the sale once they're presented with the documentation package, right? So basically a condo potentially has the right to purchase the unit at the same terms as the contract. And when would this happen, right? I've only heard of it happening once in New York City, where someone was, during one of the recessions, trying to fire sale something, and the board didn't want it to bring down the prices in the building, right? So they exerted their right of first refusal. They bought the unit, they rented it out for 2 years, and they sold it down the road, right? So again, if it's bad terms or the sale price is too low, they might do that, right? Doesn't happen often, but it can happen. A co-op board has the right to either accept or reject someone, right? They can reject for whatever reason, right? And even though there are lots of protected classes under the law, it's a very opaque process. So they usually do not give a reason, right? And they don't give a reason because it can open them up to liability or lawsuits. So when we have been able to get to the bottom of a rejection, these are a few things that we have seen, right? So the first was that the purchase price was too low, right? Because, you know, again, someone was trying to sell at a bad time. And so we actually were able to work around that by increasing the purchase price and giving a credit, right? They wanted the recorded sale price to maintain a certain threshold. Another one didn't want a celebrity in the building. They thought it was going to bring paparazzi and too many people. Again, that could, they didn't say that, but that's kind of something that we got to. Other times they don't want gifting, right? Maybe a recent college grad is getting a lump sum from their parents and the building doesn't allow that. And they didn't explicitly say they didn't allow that. So that's something. Or certain financing, right? They don't want, you know, arms. They don't want, you know, certain financing types. Or they could try to keep the building at a certain owner occupancy percentage, right? In order to maintain the ability to get mortgages in the building. So again, these are some things that we got to the bottom of, right? Someone was going to use it as a pied-à-terre and they wanted it to be primary residence, right? So again, you never know why they reject it. It doesn't happen too often, but it can happen, right? We've had a couple this year already. It does happen. And again, the person can't take it personally, even though they probably do. You know, it's more about helping them get through the, you know, what they feel after this happens. Again, if you get a board turn down, let me know. We'll go over how to handle it. Okay, so they got through the board approval. They were approved by the board. Great. Now we're in the closing stage, right? So the mortgage bank and the attorneys are made aware of the board approval. And usually the bank needs a couple days to a week or two to get the clear to close, right? The attorneys then schedule a closing date in conjunction with the management company. You as the buyer's agent will schedule a final walkthrough of the apartment with your buyer. Usually it's the evening before the closing or the morning of. You make sure everything works, make sure everything's in good order, everything that was supposed to be left there is left there and stuff like that. You go to the closing. Again, these days we're not usually there. We either get nailed the check or we pick it up. And then again, they close, person gets the keys. I always like to take a picture if I can of them with the keys. Now, after the closing is one of the most important phases for us because you want to keep this person as a customer for life, right? I always get a closing gift. I do not bring it to the closing because I want a reason to go see them again, to go see the property once they moved in. I follow up with them. How'd everything go? Do you have any questions? Do you need anything? Right? I send them a review link on my service, right? They're usually really happy after the closing, so they leave a nice review. And keep them updated on just sold marketing, right? You can use that property, right? If you sold in 123 Main Street, you could send a postcard to everyone. Hey, just wanted to let you know I just brought an amazing buyer to your building. I'd love to bring your next neighbor. Let me know if you've thought about selling your property, right? Many ways that you can kind of market off the fact that you had a closing. So again, the buyer consultation, these are some of the pages, is the way to explain this whole process to your potential buyers. And I can tell you, right, if you're working with someone that you got as a lead from Weicker, you're supposed to do this within the first week. And by doing so, we are upping our conversion rate fairly significantly because many people will go on a variety of websites, right? Brokers will go meet them, show them properties, set them up in the MLS or the RLS and just spur out listings, right? And anyone can do that. What not everyone can do is walk them through the process from before and add value to them. And if you are adding value, they are way more likely to work with you. And again, I will use this example, right? Before I was the manager, when I was on Weicker Lead Network, the first lead network lead I got, I went and showed a property to them. I said, hey, do you have 15 minutes to grab a coffee, just go over kind of what the buying process is in New York? They said, great. We sat down, we went over this. She asked questions and she said, I've gone out with 5 brokers so far and no one has explained this to me. I really appreciate this. I'm excited to work with you, right? And she worked with me the rest of the time. I sold her a property in Park Slope. So this works, right? This helps you take people who are leads and convert them into customers. And so it's important to be able to do this. Again, please review the buyer consultation process. Hopefully this helped you to understand the buying process for condos and co-ops a little bit better. And with that, I'd love to answer any questions people have about any step of the way or anything that they need. So Olivia, Manolo, Peter, any questions? Peter's good. Manolo, any questions? Oh, you're muted. You gotta mute yourself. You're muted.
Okay. Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So, no, you've been loud and clear, So I will definitely take a look at a buyer consultation process, so I can learn from it and get ready if the opportunity comes.
Great, awesome. Olivia,
Yeah.
anything you want to add or anything? No? Okay, great. Okay, well, I'm going to stop the